All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to Founders Take. I am your host, Brian Anselin, the program manager at Line Run. And Line Run is an experiential career and industry education platform for tomorrow's workforce. We empower our community of leaders to connect, innovate, and grow through media, events, and programs such as this afternoon's session. Today, we're very happy to have our good friend John Lynn, co-founder of Sella, joining us for our discussion on innovation-driven leadership during a crisis. I really can't think of anyone else who is a better representative of that whole sentence than John. But before we get to our conversation a little bit about John and his work. So John Lynn is a co-founder of Sella, a venture-backed company that builds accelerators and that organizes a global community of accelerator leaders. Through his work at Sella, John has mentored hundreds of corporations, governments, universities, and entrepreneurs on innovation. He has been featured as a speaker at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, to comment on the accelerator space and has performed speaking tours on innovation all over the world, including China and Japan. Sella has been featured on Forbes, NASDAQ, TechCrunch, and other upcoming publications, and Sella also runs the only global accelerator summit in the history of space. How'd I do, John?
Perfect.
Awesome. Again, I'm so happy to have you here and to be able to have this platform to share your incredible knowledge and your experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for organizing the event today.
Definitely. So I want to get started by talking about how you got into this work, because you're really in this enviable position of being able to work with world-class professionals, corporations, startups, governments every single day. How did you get involved in tech and innovation? And I think more importantly, what inspired you to stay?
Great question, and a big one. So I'll rely on you to keep me constrained here. But the way that I got into this space was purely by necessity, given the 2008 economic crisis. So I graduated from a top university that year as a literature major, and there was really no clear path forward given that area of study and that period of time. And so as a result, began experimenting with entrepreneurship and with technology, and I saw that a lot of the things that had made me a good writer and reader made me a good community organizer and a good leader. And so I was able to help clarify the direction of teams and design partnerships and collaborations between organizations that were productive. And that's sort of been the connecting thread between entering the economy at a time of crisis and now being in a position to help influence the way that corporations, governments, and others react to today's crises. So the way that happened was I began experimenting with entrepreneurship and technology, struggled for a long time to break through, and eventually was accepted to an accelerator program. Now this is almost 10 years ago, when the accelerator space was much smaller. We got our term sheet from an accelerator called Beta Spring, which was one of the first 10 accelerators in existence, based in Providence, Rhode Island. And it was, there were so many programs available. I ended up going through a different program. And at the end of that program, had everything. I had gone from wanting to be an entrepreneur to having technology, a team, investors, mentors, customers, market. And so when that company failed, which I'm also happy to talk about how that happened, I had to ask myself the question, do I go and try to create another tech company, or do I take this energy that I got from finding success through an accelerator and find a way to join that space? I chose that option, and I was able to get a job at Techstars New York. For attendees on the call that are not familiar with the accelerator space, Techstars is one of the first accelerator organizations in the history of the industry, next to Y Combinator and Numa. And their program in New York was one of their first programs in an ecosystem outside of Boulder or Boston. So it was a great opportunity. And in that program, got a chance to work with a lot of different founders, understand how a world-class accelerator program operates, and sort of become professional in the space. Techstars at that time was raising its first venture fund. New York at that time was still an early tech ecosystem. This was 2013.
Yep.
So I was able to corral some investment from high net worth individuals here in New York into the Techstars Venture Fund, and got some exposure to that process as well. So became good at dealing with founders, became good at dealing with investors, and ended up being able to direct an accelerator in my next step. Since then, have worked at a number of different accelerator organizations and eventually founded Sella in 2016. So this is our 5th year of operation. And as you said better than I will right now, Brian, we focus on 2 things: building accelerators in partnership with other groups, which has meant the world's largest corporations, governments, universities. We've worked with Verizon, Barclays, Penguin Random House, SAP, the United Nations, TechCrunch, have an advisory board seat in Harvard University Ventures, work with Pace University, as does Brian, and a host of other organizations. And then on the other end, we also run industry events and collaborations for accelerator leaders. So that's been the trajectory from sort of my beginnings as a professional to the space of accelerators.
I love the fact that literally your whole career was pivot, 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 and find a thing that you actually are interested and passionate about, and pivot into a position where you can actually effectuate change. I just think that's really inspiring, and really kudos to you for really connecting those dots, because on the outset, it definitely appears that they're completely separate, different things. And especially with the timing where it's New York, as you said, did not have this type of infrastructure or community around it. Everyone was working, it was very disparate, and everyone was working in silos. And it really wasn't until the accelerators and this next level of resources came about that you were able to connect all those dots. So I really applaud and appreciate the fact that you were part of that fabric that was able to weave the community into what it is today. I really give you a lot of props on that.
Thank you for that recognition, Brian.
Definitely. You kind of mentioned it towards the end on how Sella came about and where this intersection is, where we're trying to figure out how do we move together as both business and society to not just effectuate change, which is something that's been heavily in the news lately, but also how do we really progress forward to push boundaries on what's possible for our work life and life. So what is your vision for Sella overall in trying to figure and navigate through that? And how do you see the organization effectuating change in business, technology, and society in general?
Another fantastic question. That's also a big one. So feel free to interrupt, or audience members shoot a question in, and keep me focused. But the ultimate vision for Sella is to help move the accelerator space into the level of institution where There's public funding, public awareness, and public policy for the accelerator space. We believe that accelerators offer a uniquely appropriate solution to the challenges of today and the future for a number of different reasons. I'm happy to talk about why. But because of that, and because it's so important, but it's also so new and so fast growing, it can be difficult for teams that run accelerators or for individuals or teams that are seeking accelerators to find the right program, to understand the right approach, to create the right community structure behind the accelerator program. Because keep in mind, the most important thing that an accelerator does is offer a structure for an innovation community and allows founders to get efficient access to the relationships and the resources that they need. So they involve a lot of different people, a lot of different organizations, and there are so many of them all over the world now. So Sella can be an organizing force that helps everybody speak the same language when it comes to innovation and acceleration. And we can be a channel that allows the rest of the world to understand and participate in this space. And that will enable some amazing things to happen. It will enable there to be access to entrepreneurship for individuals of any background or socioeconomic status. It'll make it possible for any large institution or funder to be involved with founders or people running a small company of any kind that are inside of an accelerator program. And best of all, it'll help create more channels of revenue into the innovation ecosystem itself. Right now, corporate innovation is a $23 billion industry and projected to grow. Right now, most of that money, most of that market is dominated by classical management consultants. So Accentures, McKinsey's, BCG's of the world. And those organizations are world-class at what they do. We aspire to work with them and to partner with them. We also believe there's an opportunity for the expertise inside of the accelerator world to be an asset to some of the problems of corporate innovation in a very unique way. And if Sella is able to enter that conversation and be the entity that brings forward the latent intelligence of entrepreneurs, investors, mentors, technologists inside of the accelerator ecosystem, then we can really help manage the content of entrepreneurship out to a much larger audience. So to wrap that all up, Brian, we want to organize the industry so that it's accessible from a public perspective of public funding, public policy, and public institution. So being a part of the government, having government funding, and having government representation. We also want there to be broadened access to entrepreneurial communities all over the world so that entrepreneurs can do what they want more easily. And last, want the community's resources to be available to other institutions that are working on the world's difficult problems.
I love how clear you were able to make that, because I think one of the problems, and I'm almost sure you'd agree with me here, one of the problems with accelerators and how they're perceived is that a lot of people only see it as just for startups, where the only use case would be, okay, if I'm a corporation, I need to try to reach startups. What's the best way to do it? Other people have done accelerators. That's how we should do it. And that's not necessarily the case. But I think what you're getting at, and for as long as I've known you, I think this is what you've been advocating for, that accelerators serve a greater purpose and a different application. But I also think that this is where things like the message actually gets tied up, and people kind of misunderstand what an accelerator is and where the disconnect is. So if you can just like dial in a little bit more on what those challenges are in terms of how people see accelerators and what you and your colleagues have tried to do to try to counter against that, to convince people that, you know, this is a solution, not just for, if you want to get startups and invest money and get their technology and stuff?
Yes, yes. Wow, great question again. So I'll break that into two pieces, right? There are challenges and difficulties, blockers to how entrepreneurs understand what an accelerator is and the role that it can play in the growth of their company. And then there's also a greater misunderstanding about the role of accelerators in a tech ecosystem. So I'll say a little bit about both. When it comes to the when it's right for an entrepreneur to be seeking an accelerator and to be a part of one of those programs, yes, historically, accelerators were vehicles for investment, and they would invest in you and help connect you with other investors in their network. And what was in it for the accelerator investment group was that they would get diligence on the technology and the team that was inside of the accelerator. They would have the ability to benefit from that relationship in a longer term way, because they'd have curated such a great relationship with the founders. Now, investment is still one great reason to do an accelerator. However, because they are platforms for a community, because they organize a mentor network around the many needs and challenges of an entrepreneur, investment is only one thing they can do. They can help get sales. They can help recruit co-founders. They can help build products. They can help market. They can help rebrand. They can help create operational processes. They can help pivot and innovate themselves. So when entrepreneurs think about an accelerator, it shouldn't just be about getting that first round of funding. In fact, the industry is showing the more mature a startup is, the more likely it is to be valuable, to find value in an accelerator program. More serial founders, second-time founders, third-time founders go to accelerators. The reason for that is because they offer things that every experienced level of entrepreneur is going to face. They offer solutions, right? So from an entrepreneurial perspective, that's sort of where we want to be clear, is that accelerators are a support system for any kind of entrepreneur at any stage, if used the right way. To the other end of this question, are accelerators just about technology and startups and entrepreneurship? No. Accelerators are an educational system that was born inside of today's tech world, at Y Combinator, at Techstars, at Numa, in Silicon Valley, in Boulder, in Paris, in 2006, 2007. But the way that they've learned to bring together mentor networks around a cohort of participants who share a profile, whether that's founders or writers or individuals of any other industry. The accelerator model is a superior way to create opportunity inside of an economic environment, right? So inside of a city, inside of a town, inside of a state. And they can also be great ways to bring together not just those opportunities for employment and development and skills, but they can be a great way to focus resources, right? So if you think about going to college, you will have a class that teaches you a particular course of material. Let's go back and make it my literature degree, right? And in each class, you have different students. Each class, you have different topics. And each class is taught by a subject matter expert. Every one of those things is different in an accelerator, regardless of whether it's a tech and entrepreneurship accelerator, right? You don't have a class, you have a cohort that's going through the entire experience together. They go through every piece of the experience with each other. It's an important part of the learning that happens. There's no curriculum. There's collaboration, and content comes out, education comes out as it's needed to move a project forward, which is really the way that learning happens in any professional circumstance. And third, there's no subject matter expert. There's no professor. There's a mentor who's been out in the field making these investments or building this kind of technology or managing this kind of team, who's coming in with state-of-the-art, cutting edge, in the moment knowledge about where the opportunities are and how the cohort can take advantage of it. And so this means that accelerators as an educational vehicle enable more up-to-date information that is easier to adapt to actual economic productivity for a specific group. So this is the way that we see the accelerator as an educational structure that can be impactful anywhere. So accelerators are more broad than just startups and tech.
If we were to sum that up a little bit, it sounds to me that you're saying that, accelerators are more on the collaborative side versus a traditional class structure or a traditional top-down organizational structure is more task-oriented. So by removing the barriers, removing the blinders from the siloed system, you're able to increase innovation that way. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, that's right. You open the doors to more information faster. And there are costs to that, right? You lose depth, you lose expertise, but you do create agility. And that's really what an element that every setting needs more of as the world begins to move more quickly.
Agreed. I think another really important thing for our audience to understand is that for as holistic of a solution as accelerators are, there are several pitfalls involved with it. And if you don't have the right structure, as you pointed out just a few moments ago, it's not going to turn out right. So can you give us one or two examples of when that environment and that situation didn't mesh right and what the lessons learned are from that?
Absolutely. Happy to share. It's a very important question for us to get to. The most important piece of what makes an accelerator work is the mentor network and how well it's prepared and developed before the program, how well it's activated for the entrepreneurs or whoever the cohort is in the program. Often, an accelerator might say, we have the best mentors because we have Mark Cuban and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg are in our mentor network. When in reality, what matters is not necessarily how prolific the mentors are, but how well prepared and developed they are to be valuable to the entrepreneur or to the participant in the program. And so many programs make the mistake of saying, we need the CEO of this company, or we need the president of that organization, or we need the investor from that fund. When in fact, who is there is much less important than how they're able to contribute. So one of the things that we always tell to the corporations and institutions that we work with in particular is that this is really the one thing to get right. Because if it's wrong, then a whole host of problems will emerge in the dealings of the mentors with the founders, the mentors with each other, the mentors with other partners in the program. And when that happens, you have a mess that cannot be cleaned up. But if you do it the right way and the community is engineered with the right culture and the right expectations and the right behaviors from everyone, then it creates this multiplicative exponential effect where everybody is adding to everyone else's progress. And that's true for the entrepreneurs in the program, but also for the mentors themselves, also for the staff, also for the partners, also for the alumni. And that's when you see there being incredible output for an accelerator program. So the short answer is, when the mentor network is based on profile and not quality, is where there's the biggest risk to an accelerator breaking.
Definitely. It's all about finding that balance and finding that right mesh of people that can keep the participants and all the stakeholders engaged and all on the same track. Definitely agree with you on that. And thank you so much for sharing. Uh, we have a lot of government officials, folks involved in trade on this call today, and who are going to be watching this. We talked a lot about support structures, finding the right balance of folks involved and making sure that they're in it for the right reasons. What is government's role, or what should be government's role in an accelerator?
Fantastic. This is particularly important in our current moment. Every government should be investing and supporting accelerators as a platform for economic development, because they attract job seekers, they attract job creators, they attract capital and technology, and they attract external partnerships. They create a platform that brings together the elements of economic growth very organically. So we said before that one of the original use cases for an accelerator was investment, but that it's actually expanded to corporate development, to educational innovation, and last, to economic development. So we're based in New York City. Sella is based in New York City. And we're involved in the way that policy and policymakers are trying to figure out how to respond to the coronavirus recession, because entrepreneurs have left New York. They may come back, they may not. Some important community organizations have died and lost funding because of the recession. And so right now, while many cities may see young or potentially high value individuals and organizations go to their origin cities or states, accelerators are going to be the easy way for them to come back. And if you can say, we've invested in bringing together everything that you need to continue growing here into one spot, as long as you promise to be a great part of it as a cohort member, then we are going to make sure that the city is there for you to return to. And again, this is not just in terms of New York City. That's the example I use here. This can be used for different towns at the local level, counties, and at the state level as well.
I think you touched on a really important part of this, and it's come to the forefront because of what we just went through with the coronavirus and COVID-19, where you have this kind of flee from an ecosystem. I'm going to use your example of New York because I think it's the most prevalent, where you come to New York because of the vibrancy, because of the centricity of all the resources, the talent, the capital, it's all here. But now you see that that's not necessarily true, because you can accomplish all this stuff remotely, albeit probably not as timely, but you could still accomplish it. And I really think that this goes to how innovation inevitably changes the status quo and ultimately forms some type of disruption where people will be left behind. So how do you think people and organizations can ease into these changes, especially now, without leaving others behind?
Great. So how do we preserve access coming out of this moment of crisis in a way that doesn't put vulnerable individuals or groups at risk?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think accelerators are an important part of that because of their inherent inclusivity, right? I mean, one of the themes here has been that they are structures for community, right?
Yes.
The role and the stage that the roles that they offer to different community members and the platform and stage that they provide for all sorts of economic interaction are really going to be key, whether you use it as an accelerator or not, in keeping as many people as possible taken care of. So often there is a connection between homelessness or poverty and being disconnected. Having community, having social connection is one of the most important foundations that you can have to keep people away from those dangerous situations. So whether it's through an accelerator or not, creating even just a mentorship program that might be ongoing and allow for there to be rolling connection between individuals and organizations, or individuals and experts. It is the kind of connection that even outside of an accelerator situation is going to be key. Now, this is at odds with the way that many governments and organizations think about planning. They often think about planning in terms of growing trends, growing technology, and world events and predictions. The ironic piece of innovation is that it is a cultural phenomenon, not a technological phenomenon. Innovation is about how people collaborate, how they create together. So having a human and social centered strategy around innovation is what will actually create durability for a long-term plan in this crisis and moving forward. Trying to predict for where the markets will be, whether blockchain will work out or not, and other things that may seem more strategic is actually something to be resisted in a situation like this.
I love the fact that you brought up it starts and ends with people, because it's so true, but also in the fact that when we're talking about innovation, the part that we always skip over is how does it affect the people who end up using and or being affected by it, and really dialing into that theme of people first. How do we then move forward into a more innovative thinking, innovative type leadership society where we make decisions based on not only what's good for people, but also what makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Looks like it stumped you.
I wanna give a thoughtful answer to it because it's a thoughtful question. The most important part of responding to this crisis or future problems is in community organization. And again, this is a theme from the post-2008 world that we live in, right? Because community has become a bigger part of the way we exist online and in person. And keep in mind that Facebook is this generation's largest, fastest growing entity. It is the key to, those conversations are the key to targeting problems and assembling solutions. I mean, you can't stronghand what the solution is. You can just create the conditions for it to emerge. And trying to do anything more specific than that based on your own research and own intelligence is a habit that we have to let community allow us to break.
Definitely. And, I think that provides a really great segue to our audience questions, because the first one we have from Oliver is really, really interesting and speaks to probably what you've mentioned in the past 12 minutes, going back and forth, where for Oliver's asking, practically speaking, what steps should an accelerator managers take to create successful contractual relationships with larger institutions? So the people that you work with, the corporations, governments. I mean, not every government is like Tech. Not every city has an organization such as Tech NYC that actively advocates for the industry itself. So how do accelerators kind of navigate this? I don't want to say minefield, but I'll say a minefield of pitfalls.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's similar to what I would advise entrepreneurs to keep in mind as they deal with accelerators, right? So this is very interesting sort of analogy. The way that an accelerator should deal with a larger institution is comparable to the way that an entrepreneur should deal with an accelerator. And that means that if you're an entrepreneur thinking about an accelerator program, you don't just want to care about the deal terms, the tuition or the amount of money you'll get or the amount of equity you'll give up or the commission that they'll get on the sale that you make. You want to be very specific about what the one outcome you're going to collaborate on together is. You don't just want it to be about whether there's a demo day at a particular venue, or if there's a certain amount of promotion that goes on during the program, or if there's a certain amount of perks that you'll get as a result of doing it, right? In the same way as an accelerator or an innovation platform of any kind dealing with a large corporate sponsor or a government entity, keeping the partnership focused on very specific outcomes. Is there a revenue share? Are we trying to create a certain number of jobs? Are we trying to create a certain level of awareness? And then committing to one of those goals and not having it be about the amount of times you'll tweet each other or press releases that will feature both organizations or number of events that will be held, right? This is the way that a lot of these partnerships are structured right now. The more outcome focused it is, the more genuine the innovation actually is, right? So for example, in one of the first programs that we created for Verizon, we took a cohort of highly talented individuals that they had picked from their preferred talent institutions, so their preferred university hubs. And we took a cohort of these individuals, put them into teams, and then put them through a 5-month program. The program had very, very specific outcomes. We want to create a new product. We want to attract and develop new talent. We want to have new institutional knowledge. So in creating new projects, it was important for every team to actually be putting out a product or a prototype in the market from day one. And one of the products that was created was bought by the city of Boston before the end of the program. Every team was recording its learnings and explorations, its research to help create that new institutional knowledge. And the talent had more channels into Verizon, so they could be hired, or they could be acquired, or if their company became successful, or they could be launched internally as a new business unit. This is the level of specificity that makes programs like this work and makes these relationships between smaller innovation groups, whether it's a startup or an accelerator or something else, and a large institution really become powerful.
Definitely. I think you really summed it up really well, where the more specific you are in outcomes, the greater chance that you'll get the desired effect, and kind of that bounce off on how do you build up from the results. So yeah. I think it's really great, and thank you very much.
To follow up on that quickly, the hard thing about that is not just identifying specificity, It's also having the confidence as an innovator to box the larger organization into committing to that one very specific outcome. It can feel intimidating to ask a government or to ask a university to say, hey, this is the outcome that we think we can achieve together. Can you commit to helping us achieve that?
Makes a lot of sense. Now, if we have another question, let's check it out. From David Foy. So David, joining us from Luxembourg, thank you so much. So David's asking if you can share a little bit more about companies who are interested in joining your specific programs with Sella and how that would work in terms of a governmental relationship, a private-public accelerator program, data-driven innovation strategy. Can you share a little bit more about that and how that type of arrangement would work?
Yeah, sure. So as I said before, we've become close collaborators with multiple different city organizations, government organizations. We've worked with the New York City government, but also the Japanese government, some Chinese government entities. We're working on a potential engagement with LA. And there are different processes that are related to making a deal of any kind work, whether even if it's a government, case to case, one government and another, they all have their different political landscapes and different processes for making a deal happen. Just like every corporation has its own periods of accounting and payment and all these different things that go into making a deal happen. So the important thing is to not be aiming for a particular structure of partnership, but for everybody to be transparent in the process, right? Know who it is you need to get approval from. Know what the problem that they're trying to solve is that we can design around. To know the amount of resources in terms of money and time that can be allocated to a successful project. Because a good partner, whether it's Sella or another accelerator or another innovation group, will know what their conditions for success are, and they will say no unless those conditions are there, because it is so damaging to them if they don't. If we take on a project where we know we don't have enough time and we know that we don't have enough budget, or we know that we don't have enough support from the staff, then that is going to be really painful for our mentor network. That's going to be really painful for the cohort that we bring in. And it's going to be really painful for the partnership because there will be misalignment very quickly. So as long as you are aware of where in your team you need to get support and what can be brought in from your organization, then you're ready to start a conversation with an innovation group.
Great. And I also think, dialing into, the transparency part, I think that's just universal across innovation in general, where you want to make sure that you tell whoever the stakeholder, whoever your partner, whoever your customer is, what is it that you actually do, how you can provide value. Because if you go into it with dishonesty, you're pretty much just setting yourself up for failure.
Well, I don't think it's necessary. Yes, and I think dishonesty is rarer than ambiguity, and being unaware or unclear on what the result or the outcome that we're achieving are, or what is required to achieve that outcome. Having, again, the confidence and almost the courage to surface that transparency, see that ambiguity, and really aggressively attack it is you're right, Brian, exactly. One of the hallmarks of innovation in any situation.
We only have a few minutes left, so while I still have you, and I really would love to hear you share your ultimate vision for accelerators? So earlier you mentioned about your vision for Sella, the change you want to make through that platform. Accelerators in general, where do you see them going in the next 5 years? How does it evolve? Where do we go? What should we be looking for?
Yeah, accelerators are going to scale. So we've already seen it happen in the past 10 years. They've gone from being about 3 startups to 10 startups, being a handful of organizations in the world in 2009 to tens of thousands, dozens of thousands all over the world in 2020. And so while they've been growing from a volume point of view, they'll also grow from a capacity point of view, because we'll be able to bring in more capital to build out accelerator teams and help them create larger mentor networks and help them serve larger cohorts, to the extent that they'll be able to be an institution in society the way that universities or corporations are. And that's really where, regardless of whether Sella is instrumental, where the space is headed, because accelerators are continuing to be this place that people go and trust to solve certain problems. And as time goes on, that will become more concrete, that will become more clear to a larger group, and their ability to provide that service will increase along with that education.
Definitely. And, not only do I appreciate you coming on, sharing your knowledge, sharing your wealth of experience with us today, and being here also with our audience who's going to be watching this post event, but I appreciate what you've done for our organization as well. And I really wanted to give a shout out to you on this, because you were probably the second or third person that I spoke to about our own accelerator and what we do with students transitioning and making the leap into the tech industry. And I think our use case really speaks to what you were saying earlier in the conversation on how accelerators have this broad use case. It's just a matter of really drilling down the specifics and what the outcomes are, and building a tribe around what your mission is and how do you get there. So, for that and for this, I really do appreciate everything you've done to help enlighten us on leadership and accelerators and how we can use both to improve business and society.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, so Line Run works with Pace University. It's one of our partners, and Brian and his team had a program that was just a great match for the challenges that students were facing in that situation, and they've done a great job delivering on it. So have appreciated your work as well.
Definitely. So before I let everyone go, just want to share some of our upcoming events that are coming up. So most of you on this call today who are participating know about what we have coming up tonight with New York City, featuring New York City Tech and Startups, which is really apt for our discussion over the past 45 minutes, discussing where we go from here. And in that light, we're also doing spotlights on the Boston and Austin tech ecosystems in July. So some stuff to look forward to. You can check it out by going to linerun.co/events. But in the meantime, John, again, I appreciate you so much. My good friend, I'm just so happy we were able to record this and for me to be able to share you, not just your knowledge, but you with our community. So again, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the incredible questions we got, really in depth, and brought us, I think, full circle in our whole discussion today. So again, thank you, John. Thank you to our attendees. And again, linerun.co/events. We're doing a whole suite of them over the next month or so on innovation, on the tech ecosystem. So if that's something you're interested in, check us out. All right.
Thank you, Brian.
Definitely. Have a good day, everybody.